Hey guys, tonight we are wandering away from glowing screens, deadlines, and alarm tones that sound suspiciously like hostile robots. Instead, we're curling back through time into a world where your morning wake-up call was less concerned with productivity hacks and more concerned with prayer, rhythm, and perhaps the occasional irritable rooster. Yes, the monks of medieval Europe and their very peculiar relationship with timekeeping, bells, and crowing birds. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a medieval monastery morning. Picture it, shuffling bleary-eyed out of a straw bed, barefoot on icy stones, long before dawn, answering a bell not for brunch, but for a psalm. If you thought hitting the snooze button once made you guilty, imagine oversleeping when half a dozen chanting monks are counting on your voice to blend. No Starbucks in sight, and certainly no Wi-Fi strong enough for your "I'm totally awake" playlist. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I always love imagining people in different corners of the world drifting toward sleep together, like a quilt sewn from many time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The monastery spreads before you in dim starlight. Its walls are gray, but softened by the dark, small windows like faint breaths against the craggy stone face. You can sense the quiet hum of routine life, built not to chase novelty, but to repeat, to layer the same actions daily, as if stacking bricks of time itself. And here, everything is about rhythm. The monks' lives are measured not by whim but by bells. Yet bells, well, bells don't ring themselves. Someone has to know when to strike them. And before gears and pulleys made the job predictable, there were humbler tactics. The rooster in the yard with feathers gleaming slightly in the moonlight. The brother who swore he could read starlight like a natural clock face. The elder monk whose bones creaked loudly enough at midnight to suggest it was time for You could call it early timekeeping, or you might simply call it inventiveness, born of necessity. The accepted fact here is that medieval monasteries were bound by the liturgy of our specific prayers meant to be offered at specific times of day and night. These included matins in the middle of the night, lauds at dawn, and then a whole lineup of rituals that turned the monastery into one sacred schedule, whether it was convenient to your sleep cycle or not. Prayers had their place and hour, but here comes the quirk. Many monks may have relied on roosters as their first vocal alarm system. Imagine, you're asleep in the dormitory, tangled in woolen blankets, monks snoring in harmonious tones of their own. Suddenly, from outside, a rooster cuts the night in half with his sharp, unapologetic crow. It doesn't matter if you find him endearing or annoying, he's on duty, assigned by nature itself. He is, in effect, your alarm clock. And it makes you wonder, did monks train roosters to crow at more precise hours, or did they simply adapt when the luck of biology gave them a timely bird? Historians still wonder how reliable rooster calls really were in practice. Could an especially lazy rooster derail the sacred schedule? Were there disasters when the bird overslept, or worse, felt experimental and crowed at the wrong hour? These small uncertainties, buried in dusted manuscripts, keep the picture just imperfect enough to make it all wonderfully human. You walk slowly along the cloister, listening. The night is very still, save for the faint ruffle of feathers in the yard. An unlit candle leans on a windowsill, wax dripped down in ridges, like the lines of time itself. The monks do not stir yet, except for one who turns in his bed and sighs. Time is not quite demanding, but it soon will. The rhythm is set, and rhythm, as you're beginning to feel, is medicine in its own way. There's something oddly soothing about being surrounded by people who know exactly what their next hour holds. No debate about calendars, no buzzing digital notifications, just certainty, pure and simple. When the rooster crows, you rise. When the bell sounds, you pray. When silence reigns, you rest. Routine is often mocked in the modern world, but here, it feels like a kind of secret lullaby. The rooster shuffles flap of wings, slight hop onto a beam near the courtyard wall. He's preparing, you think, readying his vocal cords for his crucial cosmic task. His chest quivers, as if the whole monastery sits on hold for his note. And when he opens his beak, sharp and echoing into night air, you realize you are not annoyed. Instead, you smile faintly, because something about this bird has launched entire days into sacred running order. It may not be efficient, it may not be exact, but it was passing well enough for centuries. And perhaps that's the coziest paradox. The medieval monastery designed for strictness still depended on creatures and tools that erred, snoozed, or cracked a funny note now and then. That blend of sacred intention and human accident forms the gentle heart of tonight's story. A bell waits above, ropes coiled loosely, ready for a monk's pull later at dawn. But for now, it is the rooster who holds sovereignty. He is ungilded, unmeasured, untrained, and yet he is time. The rooster has spoken, his crow cutting into the final threads of night, and suddenly the world is in motion. Wooden doors creak, like bleary eyes, opening after being stubbornly shut for one moment too long. In the dormitory, monks rise slowly, their woolen habits hanging heavy around them, shadow pooling in the folds of fabric. There's no chatter, only the shuffling of bare feet across stone, the occasional cough muffled into a sleeve, and the low hum of prayers half muttered, as if they're meant more to coax wakefulness than to praise the Almighty just yet. Routine here is not simply convenient, it's sacred. You're beginning to realize how much of monastic life is built around a very precise scaffolding of time. The liturgy of the hours shapes every day, each prayer service aligning bodies and voices into an unceasing chorus that bridges heaven and earth. Lauds at dawn, prime, not long after, then terce, sext, none, vespers, and finally, compline, folding the night back into sleep. More often than not, you'd probably lose count after sunrise. But these men, they've memorized every prayer, every psalm, every pause where silence is demanded like punctuation in a cosmic sentence. One accepted fact: Benedictine monks were bound by the rule of Saint Benedict, written back in the 6th century, which laid out the divine importance of order and timekeeping. In this vision, time wasn't a commodity to be managed, it was consecrated, each tick of life an opportunity for prayer. Everything had its slot. Meals lasted only an allotted window, working hours parceled neatly, prayer ruling supreme. If you had restless ambitions to randomly go fishing or take a walk whenever you felt like it, you'd be sorely disappointed. But here's something quirky. Monks often played with subtle cues in their lives to keep from slipping. Roosters helped, yes, but so too did human memory. An elder monk might poke awake the novices with his staff, muttering, "Wake, wake, or your soul will miss its chance." Or there might be the brother on watch duty, secretly the medieval equivalent of your office colleague who sets 3 alarm clocks just in case. He would stay awake during the dead of night to be absolutely sure no one drifted past their required prayer time. Imagine the guilt if he nodded off the fate of sacred punctuality resting on one man whose eyelids weighed heavier than stone. Historians still wondered just how precisely this rigid schedule was maintained. Did monasteries truly manage to time prayers down to the minute, or was it more a matter of general proximity, where dawn meant dawn, and dusk meant dusk, give or take the rooster's mood? In practice, it was likely somewhere in between, a system where accuracy was less about numbers and more about rhythm. Yet, even rhythm, as every bleary novice knew, required nudges, bells, claps, and sometimes a loud tap on your shoulder by an unsympathetic superior. You imagine yourself stumbling through this morning, yawning so wide you'd probably disrupt the opening chant. The air inside the chapel is chilled. the stone altar rising out of shadow, faintly lit by a single candle stubbed low in a holder. Monks line the benches, voices joining in unison, not one of them glancing to see if you've managed to keep up. They've done this yesterday. They'll do it tomorrow. This is life until death, and no one seems burdened by it. It's repetition, yes, but repetition treated as devotion rather than drudgery. Asterisk, the rhythm is intoxicating. Feet shuffle into walking paths, bells bob from hands. The sound of psalms unfolding like waves, hitting the same shore without fail. Routine here is not the dullness against which modern life rebels. It is harmony and comfort, the certainty that time belongs not to chaos, but to a pattern bigger than you. Asterisk, a novice slips on his long robe, nearly trips, and receives a quiet sigh from one of his elders. It's a gentle reminder that even in an age of solemn order, humanity refuses to polish itself perfect. Nothing breaks reverence faster than a clatter of knees on stone and a flush of embarrassment across a young monk's cheeks. You stifle your laugh though. One monk in the corner clearly can't. Asterisk, and yet, the emphasis remains. Every step, every note, every pause is part of a living clock, one that moves not by gears and springs, but by the unity of those within it. You're caught in their tide, lulled by this repetition that, frankly, works better than any lavender spray you've tried to dose your pillows with. It's a lullaby of stone, bell, and voice. Asterisk, your eyes track the faint sun glow seeping at last across the horizon. The rooster, long since silent, has done his job well. Now the bells will take over metal incarnations of time, bringing order into a waking world. Asterisk, the monastery hums with expectancy. Time itself feels less like a cage and more like a bomb. You sigh not from weariness, but from a strange relief. At last, you don't have to decide what happens next. The hours already know. The chant has settled into silence, the echoes of psalms clinging faintly to the stone like dew. You shuffle with the monks back through narrow hallways, guided less by firelight than by the habitual memory of their feet. It is still well before sunrise. You can feel it, the weight of darkness pressing against the walls, the night reluctant to release its grip. The air is cold enough that each exhale blossoms into steam, which quickly vanishes into the great hush. This moment before dawn is its own world. No bells ring just yet. The rooster takes occasional preens, but even he knows it isn't quite time to boast. Still, the monks stir, as though a hidden string has tugged them into being. You soon notice that rising before light isn't a single heroic act. It's woven naturally into their daily fabric. For centuries, monks were expected to rise in the deep of night, sometimes after only a few hours' rest, to return to prayer. It wasn't optional. It was medicine for the spirit, and perhaps an endurance test of the body, as though sleep were not a rite, but an indulgence that must be trimmed to keep the soul lean. The accepted fact is clear. This rhythm of sleeping and waking was not designed for comfort. Midnight vigils, called matins, kept the cycle intact. Monks were summoned to prayer while the stars still dragged their silver chains across the sky. For modern ears, it sounds cruel, almost laughable, but in its own strange way, it was also calming. The predictable break, the pause, the quiet too aren't steered by your phone's glow. Instead, you are pulled awake by silence itself, married to stars and bells. Then comes the quirk. Not every monastery had exquisite bells or reliable roosters. Some depended on human ingenuity. Monks would scatter sand across the floors before lying down. Whoever woke and noticed a faint change in starlight would drag staff or hand through the sand in specific lines, a signal to rise. The floor turned into a chalkboard of reminders, scratched in darkness. Quirky, yes, but remarkable. Imagine padding across gritty floors in the early morning, with carved signals drawn in like breadcrumbs pointing you back to the chapel. Historians still wonder how monks balanced human frailty with such a rigid schedule. Did some monasteries allow for more sleep than others? Did abbots truly insist on strict wakefulness, even at the expense of health? Or was there more compassion tucked in than records admit? The sources argue, but standing here among them, the question feels oddly unimportant. Their world is not a debate, is an agreement. Whatever the stars and bells require, they will do. You weigh this against your own modern habits. Think of groans and bargains with the snooze function. 10 minutes bought like trinkets at a market stall, delaying obligation. Here, there is no snooze button. The only bargain is silence first, prayer next. You almost envy them for the clarity, though you also decide your chances of surviving a week here are slim. Day 1, a fine tourist. Day 2, a snoring heretic. The chapel doors swing once again, and as you take your seat on the long wooden bench, you realize the darkness inside is thick, but not frightening. Instead, there's intimacy to it. The fire is banked low, candles stubbed, wax dripping and long icicles that remind you time is literally melting all around you. The monks bow heads in rhythm, voices low and grave, chanting not in haste, but as though they're carefully drawing on parchment with each sound. The fascinating part lies in their reliance on instinct and nature. Stars are guides. Wind drafts mark approaching dawn. Cold air stiffens, clothes more fiercely, before the first light. They don't measure hours as we do. They experience them with skin, ear, and sight. Each sense becomes a small clock. It's like walking within a human observatory. You realize, every monk leaning slightly into night, feeling its heartbeat and answering it in chants. A novice shifts beside you, his face pale in the faint glow. His eyelids droop embarrassingly, and at one point his head tips forward with an audible thump against the bench. You try not to smile, but so do the others. One older monk nudges him awake, muttering something that probably translates to, "God prefers your voice upright." Even humor sneaks into cloistered hours. Because what else can you do when human bodies remind you they too have clocks of their own? A rooster, as if cued by comic timing, crows loudly from the yard. The sound is sharp and comedic, like a cymbal crashing into an organ recital. A ripple of amusement shifts through the benches. Even in a house devoted to sacred order, you cannot stop the rooster from stealing his moment. And perhaps that is the hidden point of it. All this harmony requires both solemnity and accident, clarity and chaos, chance and laughter. You sit in the small cold air and realize your body, against its will, is adjusting. Breathing is slower, heartbeat calmer. Routine has spelled itself onto your bones, even after this short while. What began as discipline feels suspiciously like peace. The world outside the cloister is vast, but in here everything is measured, tangible, reachable. Each pause counted, each voice matched, each rooster tolerated. And yet you wonder, if you had lived here, would you have called this comfort or cruelty? Was the night always such an obedient neighbor, or did monks wrestle behind closed doors with resentment toward every bell? Historians can debate. You are simply here, carried forth, listening until the first pale prayer of dawn brushes across the roof beams, and the next hour takes its place in the tapestry. The rooster has done his part. The stars have begun to dim, and now the faintest gray sigh of dawn seeps over the monastery walls. You sense something stirring in the stone itself, as if the entire building has leaned into wakefulness with the rest of its residents. And there, cutting through it all, comes the unmistakable chorus of roosters. Not just one loud and self-important bird, but several feathered alarm systems, crowing in a sort of haphazard duet. It's not music, it's pandemonium. And yet, for these monks, it is timing incarnate. Fact holds steady here. Roosters really were used as natural timekeepers in medieval monasteries. Their crowing at the break of dawn was seen everywhere from scripture to daily life as nature's declaration of morning. A rooster's call wasn't about precision in minutes, but it was reliable enough to call sleepers out into prayer. For the modern ear, a rooster at sunrise feels rustic or picturesque. But for monks, it was as regular a tool as the bells overhead. And then, the quirky truth. Roosters weren't always perfectly consistent. They crowed when they liked, sometimes early, sometimes late. Sometimes because they heard another rooster in the next village and simply couldn't resist chiming in. Which meant monks sometimes found themselves awake well before dawn, staring out with squinting eyes, muttering prayers through yawns, waiting for the official hour, or oversleeping when a distracted rooster simply opted to stay silent. It's entirely possible that centuries of bleary monks blamed roosters in their hearts, even as they considered them vital. And it raises the smiling question, did monks ever train their roosters? Were there secret methods to keep them punctual, like feeding them at the exact same time, or confining them near the chapel? Historians still wonder if some monastic orders bred their own feathered alarm clocks for dependability, or simply chalked it up to divine will. Either way, one truth is clear: in a monastery, a rooster's crow was not an annoyance to be hushed, it was a summons to God. You glance toward the courtyard now, where one proud bird struts between the shadows. His red comb is a crown in the pale light, his feathers inked in iridescence as though he's been painted with brush and shell gold just for this morning. He tosses his head as if to say, "This is my part in salvation history." My notes open, the office of lauds. Behind him, another rooster puffs, rivals in pride, dueling for airspace with their calls. The monks, unoffended by the chaos, take their cue. Wooden benches scrape stone, sandals shuffle, habits whisper as they move toward the chapel doors again. It is time, not time in your sense of buzzing minutes, but that grander notion the hour has arrived. Roosters or no roosters. Dawn doesn't shout, it crows. The air outside smells damp with dew, the grass bowed under drops that catch the silver light. You follow them, blinking into the yard. For a moment, you think about your modern alarm app, with its carefully chosen chime, digital neatness promising punctuality, and you compare it with this: birds yelling, monks filing forward half asleep, the rhythm messy and human, yet strangely more tender. You chuckle quietly. Who needs AI voice prompts when you have medieval poultry honking you into piety? One elder monk pauses to pat a rooster on the back, his rough hand brushing along the wings with absence of disdain. It strikes you. The rooster is treated with a kind of respect, as though he is a colleague in the grand endeavor of maintaining sacred time. No roll call is complete without him. No dawn feels real until his sharp note slices the air. The chapel receives them again, voices lifting against dawn's pale backdrop. The rooster lingers outside, uncowed by the solemnity, still crowing because one announcement is never enough. And his duty, apparently, is to keep the entire countryside updated. The monks sing anyway, folding human and bird calls into a harmony that belongs only here. In these walls, where absolutely everyone, feathered or not, is part of the liturgy. Breath rises. Stone hums faintly with sound, and you sit near the door, realizing something simple. The rooster may not have invented timekeeping, but he invented the experience of being called from sleep into rhythm. Whether you consider that chaos or salvation depends on the hour of the morning and the generosity of your mood. A monk grins, perhaps amused by your glance at the birds, and mutters softly as he passes. Even the rooster prays. You may never know if that was meant sincerely, or as a joke wrapped in cassock folds, but either way, the sound that drags you all into a new day is undeniable. And so the rooster crows again, his beak open, his throat vibrating like the monastery's most natural bell. The rooster eventually quiets, his duty fulfilled, but the sound of bells soon fills in where feathers leave off. Gentle at first, a singular peal, drifting from a handheld clapper, breaking through the fragile silver of dawn. You fall into step with the monks again, and as you shuffle into the courtyard you notice one of the brothers carrying a small polished bell. The metal glows faintly red from firelight, his hand gripping the wooden handle with practiced ease. This, you realize, is one of the monastery's first true alarm clocks, a portable chime designed not to rouse a city, but to shepherd a room of half-sleeping monks. Asterisk. Here's the historical fact. Monks made abundant use of handbells in daily life, especially before larger towers could house great swinging bells. These smaller instruments were light enough to carry and loud enough to stir groups from dormitories, signaling meals, vigils, or times of prayer. To you, it seems modest. To the medieval monk, it was a heartbeat of order. Asterisk. But here's the quirky little addition. Not every brother had the patience or skill to wield these delicately at dawn. Some monks, perhaps, either by mistake or mischievous humor, would swing them too violently, creating more racket than music, sounding more like a clumsy pot being kicked across the stone than a sacred summons. You imagine being roused, not by the clear, holy ring of a bell, but by the clattering equivalent of a medieval trash can lid, and you resist laughing aloud. One can only suppose these heavy-handed ringers did not get repeat assignments. Asterisk. And here's the historian's lingering puzzle. Just how coordinated were these bells with prayer schedules before grand mechanical clockwork came to support them? Did bell ringers guard the hours precisely, or were they operating more from instinct, with a little wiggle room between sacred responsibility and human error? Some accounts suggest monks were well trained in rhythms of the earth, but still, in the hours before dawn, exactitude may have been a little hazy. Asterisk. You picture yourself now as a novice in bed, groggy and resisting dawn, when suddenly you hear that first handheld bell shaking stubbornly at the door. Its high, metallic tone invades your skull, unrelenting, insistent. There's no ignoring it. You grumble like monks surely did centuries ago, pulling wool over your face, wondering belatedly why the rooster couldn't have been enough. But the disciplined hands of your brethren don't care for your complaints. Song, after all, begins now. Asterisk. As you peek into the chapel with the others, you notice a bell laid reverently on a wooden stool at the front. It isn't ornamental, it's functional, but treated almost like a relic. The sound you just heard has an authority beyond the bird call. The rooster was the instinct. The bell was the confirmation. Together, they create certainty. Asterisk. And curiously, you find a warmth in this ritual. Unlike modern alarms, shrill, soulless, mechanically, since the bell was played like an instrument, wielded by human hand, under a brother's watchful care. It might occasionally clang awkwardly, but it belonged to someone. The sound of morning was never impersonal here. It wasn't demanded. It was invited, even if sternly. Asterisk. By now, you've grown strangely accustomed to the rhythm of noise. The crow, the clap of sandals, the ring of handheld brass bouncing on stone. Each sound is more than function, its story. Each one loops your body into this woven cycle of wakefulness where there is very little choice but surprising comfort. Asterisk. Morning light strengthens, and through it you see one brother grin wryly as another embarrassingly drops his small bell during procession. The loud clatter ricochets down the nave, and though no one laughs aloud, shoulders in the back row stiffen with suppressed amusement. Even in solemnity, humor hums along like an unspoken subtext. Asterisk. The monks settle again into chant, and the air ripples faintly from their vibrations. But in your head, you still hear it, the thin clang of that humble, portable alarm. Man's attempt to capture the morning, one handheld chime at a time. Asterisk. And whether you like it or not, you're awake now. The bell has been tucked neatly back onto its stool, and the air inside the cloister grows quieter once more. You follow a group of monks as they drift down the hall, their sandals whispering across worn stones like brushes sweeping dust into patterns you cannot quite read. There's no hurry, time here is not rushed, it's simply marked. Which is why when you notice a bucket dripping at the corner, a measured plink into a small basin, it dawns on you. Not all clocks need hands or bells. Some keep their hours in drops. Here's the firm fact. Medieval monasteries often experimented with water clocks, or clepsydras, simple devices using dripping water to measure duration. The oldest examples existed in the ancient world, but by medieval times, monks were still adapting this technology for their monastic hours. A candle can burn unreliable. A rooster might get lazy, but water has patience. Each drop a beat of time, falling with stubborn precision. The quirkier note, though, is that these contraptions weren't always as reliable as theory suggests. A cold morning might thicken the water to a slower drip. Algae could clog holes. Clumsy novices occasionally knocked them over, the medieval equivalent of dropping your iPhone in the toilet. Instead of precise order, you'd end up with monks rushing half awake to prayers prematurely, or dragging feet because the water insisted hours hadn't quite passed. Perhaps the most startling thought is that one sleepy monk tasked with tending the clock might have been responsible for the rhythm of an entire abbey. That's enough pressure to keep you more awake than the rooster. And historians still scratch their heads. How widespread were these devices in smaller monasteries? Were they central, commanding the hours, or merely curiosities in wealthier abbeys, with scholars eager to experiment? No one can say for certain, but whether precise or ornamental, these clocks teach the same lesson. Humans have been trying, awkwardly and creatively, to bottle time for as long as we've been haunted by its passing. You lean closer, watching droplets. They glitter in the faint light, each bead swelling, shivering, and falling with a tiny sound that, if you listen, could lull you deeper into calm. The monks pass it without fussets, just another keeper of hours among them. But for you, this trickle feels meditative. You breathe with it. A pause, then a fall, like heartbeat's cousin, like rhythm's quiet apprentice. One novice, clearly eager to prove himself clever, squints at the clock and mutters something to his elder. You catch just enough to know it's a bet a cheeky claim that his own humming could mark time just as well. The elder raises an eyebrow, but lets the boy try. He hums, holds breath, hums, holds breath, and by the third cycle, he collapses into coughing, clutching his ribs. The elder snorts, unimpressed. Water does not faint, he murmurs. The novices chuckle, lesson delivered. You feel yourself smiling too. There's something wonderfully charming about all this, humans grappling to master time, knowing full well they cannot. They enlist birds, bells, dripping basins, anything at hand, to tether slippery hours. Yet time always finds ways to resist capture, and in the resistance, humor and reverence live side by side. The candlelight shifts, painting gold lines across cold stone. The plink-plink rhythm thickens the quiet, and for a moment you can almost trick yourself into believing the water is not marking minutes at all, but lulling you into dream. Your breath has slowed to match its pace. Maybe that was the hidden purpose all along, not efficiency, but a rhythm gentle enough to call even your restless shoulders into order. Outside, the rooster tests his voice again, though less furiously, as if unwilling to be forgotten now that the water has stolen the audience. Laughter runs through a few monks' throats, brief and warm, and the day moves forward, indifferent to its own unraveling, and you realize, quietly here, time is measured not only by invention, but also by participation. The monks, you, the rooster, even this struggling water clock, the whole lot of you bound together to declare what hour it might be. Precision matters less than presence, and presence, right now, is everything. The steady drip of the water clock fades behind you as you shuffle deeper into the echoing stone halls, and soon another curious contraption catches your eye. This one is oddly more theatrical than practical, a candle with markings clawed into its side, as though someone scratched impatient tally marks into wax, hoping to trap the hour before it slipped away. The flame wobbles, its glow trembling against altar walls. Here it is, humanity's next attempt at taming time, not with drops of water, but with melting wax. Asterisk, here's the solid fact. Monks in some houses really did use candle clocks. The idea was deceptively simple. Candles were marked with specific intervals, and as the wax burned down, the dropping line of the flame counted the passage of time. Some even embedded small weights, or pins, into the wax, which would fall with tiny clinks when the candle thinned enough. Imagine that time measured not with numbers but with soft wax and the occasional metallic crash. Asterisk. And here comes the quirk. This system was more whimsical than exact. On windy nights, the flame would devour wax twice as fast. On warmer evenings, the wax sagged into unexpected rivers, pooling awkwardly onto stone floors. Candle time was as much about storytelling as it was math. You could imagine novices sighing when their assigned candle slumped into liquid chaos an hour early, throwing the whole schedule slightly off. Worse still, if a mischievous brother trimmed too much wick, you might find yourself fast-forwarding by mistake, like hitting the medieval version of a skip button. Asterisk. Historians still debate how widely candle clocks were used as practical devices versus symbolic ones. Were they truly depended upon, or mostly visual props, to remind monks of passing hours already paced by prayer? The argument flickers just as unstably as the flame itself, but here in this chamber, you can sense the quiet devotion given to these fragile lights. They are not perfect, but perhaps that is the charm. Asterisk, you lean forward. The candle sputters and flares again. It sighs up waxy smoke like the chimney of a very small house. Lines carved into its side glistened faintly in gold. One pin falls with a delicate plink, hitting the stone a note so soft it might be the breath of time itself announcing its escape. This tickles your brain. It's almost like music. The candle singing the minutes away, not through numbers, but through little golden accidents. Asterisk, one monk notices your fascination. He grins and says nothing, but produces a second candle to show you. This one has marks drawn elaborately into the wax at different heights, like a timeline gently carved. He lights it with the calm of someone who knows where this evening is headed. The flame will eat the design, small event by event, until all is rest again. To him, the candle is not a crude clock, but a miniature storytelling device. Every shadow on the wall, a narrator teaching about the passing of life itself. Asterisk, you're struck by how oddly beautiful this is. A flame that, ever wandering, hungry, flickered turned into a clock, not by resisting its nature, but by letting it burn. The monks transformed inevitability into utility. They didn't curse that time burns away. They said, let's let burning tell us when. Asterisk, your head tips slightly, drowsy, as you watch wax slouch steadily toward collapse. A novice nearly nods off too, his chin dipping dangerously toward his chest, until one monk nudges him with a laugh. The candle hasn't marked an hour yet, but human bodies already keep stubborn clocks of their own. Time layered upon time. Candle, chant, rooster, water drip, drowsy, novice, all overlapping like an orchestra with no conductor, yet somehow always in harmony. Asterisk, suddenly, the flame stretches tall for a moment, before softening again, and in that strange rise you're convinced it winked knowingly. You chuckle quietly. Perhaps it was in on the joke. Asterisk, you breathe deeply now, lulled by wax and fire, by its quiet declaration that hours are less a science than a poem, and as its light shivers gently across the rafters, you realize, time, here, doesn't march, chit melts, dances, breathes. You stay watching that candle flicker low, the little pin clinking against the floor now faint memory, as if time itself just let out a sigh. But while the wax drifts away at its own leisurely pace, your thoughts begin to unwind into questions much larger than melted candles or clucking roosters. Were these medieval monks obsessively precise about hours the way we are today? Or was there a sense of time framed differently? Something more fluid, something sacred rather than numeric. Asterisk. This is where the historians step in, with furrowed brows and differing opinions, which makes for delightful bedtime fodder. Some argue that in these monasteries, time wasn't about measuring productivity or efficiency at all. It was cyclical, aimed at drawing the monks nearer to God by rhythm alone. Waking for matins in the dead of night may have had less to do with counting the exact moment than helping a community step outside ordinary reality, suspended between sleep and prayer. Asterisk a solid fact to rest your head on. Monastic schedules were intended to align with the liturgy of the hours, not with the precise, ticking seconds that drive modern society. This made medieval monasteries, ironically, some of the best timekeepers in Europe, since they functioned almost as guardians of sacred rhythm. A monk's day was carved into bite-sized pieces, so that prayer routinely pierced the veil of labor, meals, and rest. It wasn't about getting ahead, it was about never forgetting what truly ran the world. Asterisk. And here's a quirky little twist. Sometimes abbots themselves bent the rules. It's recorded in monastic scribbles that abbots occasionally adjusted the clock, according to a convenience, ringing the bell for midnight services a little later, if the community seemed too groggy, or rushing early morning vigils, when a snowstorm made the cloister hall less inviting. It was timekeeping, with a wink. Yes, the rule is rigid, but even it must answer sometimes to cold toes and weary eyes. Asterisk. Imagine now that debate taking root in soft whispers through your hall. Some brothers insisting that prayer must be rung precisely. Others shrugging that God probably wouldn't scold them for starting 10 minutes late, because the rooster hadn't yet felt inspired to shout. Historians still wonder if this balancing act meant that strict order was always more aspirational than fully achieved. Were monks truly slavish to their time-bound ritual? Or was it a delicate negotiation between roosters, bells, bodies, and the weather? Asterisk. Listening, you lean a little against the wall, feeling stone cool against your shoulder. The quiet between chants becomes as tangible as the chants themselves. These monks didn't obsess about milliseconds. They bowed instead into something both strict and strangely forgiving. For them, the passing of time wasn't a tyrant. It was a framework to breathe within. Asterisk. Let your mind linger on how different this is from your modern timers and clocks, which glare, buzz, and shout in tones designed to jar your nervous system. A medieval monk may have rued the rooster crowing too early, but he never received a vibrating bedshaker alarm. He listened for bells sung by human hands, or waited for the patient drip of water, or gazed at a candle dissolving into molten hours. There's softness in that pausa, gentleness tucked even inside. Discipline. Asterisk. One monk glances at the candle in the chapel, then smiles sideways, whispering something about the rooster being a better clock than some brothers. A few chuckles ripple through the benches. The debate continues. Informal, yet lasting centuries. Was time sacred rhythm or strict order? Asterisk. And while no one around you seems too anxious about settling the matter, you realize how soothing it is for you to sit in that tension too. To soften into the idea that time doesn't always need to be measured fiercely for it to matter. Maybe it flows best as something lived communally, touched, in chant, laughter, crow, and echo all the same. Asterisk. So the question lingers, like smoke curling against rafters. What if time itself isn't about precision at all? What if it's about participation? The monks seem perfectly content with that paradox. And so, as the last note rises into air heavy with waxent, you too allow uncertainty to loosen your bones. The debate swirls only faintly in the background as the next hours roll forward, melted candles leaning low, roosters hiccuping triumphantly from the yard, and bells ringing in their patient way. Yet by now, you notice something odd, something gently warming in the air. The monks, for all their solemn duty, are funny, and not by accident, either. Humor seems stitched into their rhythm like gold thread in their manuscripts, quiet but gleaming when the light hits. Asterisk. You hear it first when a young novice arrives late to the cloister, hair tousled wildly, habit half askew, the lingering shadow of an unwise nap scrawled across his red cheek. The elder monk waves him in with mock gravity and mutters a verse about the rooster, crowing louder than thy ears. The novices titter, the elders smile, and just like that, lateness has transformed into laughter instead of rebuke. Asterisk. Here's your historical anchor. Plenty of surviving notes and anecdotes remind us that monks, even in their cloister, carried humor with them. Comedy wasn't foreign to their lives. It laced their work and worship. Medieval people, contrary to the gray portraits we conjure, had no shortage of jokes. In monasteries, humor could appear in stories shared during meal, in scripture readings recited with a wink, or in songs punctuated with deliberately silly verses meant to lighten spirits. Asterisk. And the quirky detail. Humor often turned roosters themselves into the butt of jokes. A chant might slip in a verse about Brother Thomas sleeping so heavily even the rooster got bored and went hoarse. Or an abbot might tease the kitchen cook for relying more on the rooster's crow to start the porridge than on any sense of discipline. Somewhere buried in medieval margins, doodled roosters wearing crowns still glare at us today, feathers immortalized as comic royalty in some scribe's boredom. Asterisk. But the historian's question always lingers. Was humor in monasteries merely tolerated, or was it deliberately cultivated as part of healing? Did abbots secretly encourage levity to balance fatigue, or did monks themselves sneak it in wherever solemnity bent too heavy? There isn't clarity, but the echoes jokes left in marginalia, light-hearted songs woven into parish records, suggest humor wasn't frowned upon. It was cherished, even needed, like a medicine. Asterisk. You stare at the circle around the fire as monks prepare for their mid-morning tasks. A bell is struck, not with sharp solemnity, but with a flourish that makes several brothers smirk. The ringer bows, as though he were playing harp, instead of simply waking the friar to fetch bread. Another monk, with exaggerated pomp, pretends to trip into psalm intonations, inserting a goat's bleat between lines. The novices laugh louder than they should, but no sharp rebuke falls. Joy is caught like a spark, leaping from robe to robe. Asterisk. And you drowsy, though you are find it threadbare, impossible not to chuckle along. It surprises you. In your imagination, the medieval monastery loomed as a place of stern silence, voices sour with constant psalms. Yet here it is, alive with wit, poking fun not at devotion, but at the tired bodies, forced to sustain it. Humor doesn't mock faith here, it oils its gears. Asterisk. The monk beside you turns with mock seriousness and whispers, if the rooster does not rise tomorrow, perhaps he too needs confession. His face is deadpan. Yours is not. You laugh, quietly, and in that moment, you belong to them not for discipline or devotion, but for something lighter that still counts as medicine. Asterisk. The hut fills with song once again, but this time it's playful, verses weaving in jests, rhythms daring you not to grin. Each absurdity grows contagious. By the time the chant fades, shoulders once heavy with fatigue are loosened. Even your breath is uncaned. OTTED. Asterisk. You think of modern medicine. All too often laughter is fenced away from healing, dismissed as leisure or distraction. Yet here, laughter is their proof. Their evidence is not formulas on parchment tits, the relaxed body of the monk across from you, shaking just enough from having laughed at his own clumsy candletop vow. Asterisk. Inside the monastery, humor is not rebellion, it's participation, it's belonging, and it seeps gently through the walls tonight, mixing with wax bells and rooster calls to prove that, even in sacred hours, merriment is as indispensable as prayer. Asterisk. And maybe, you realize, as you press back into the bench, we all need a rooster joke before dawn now and then. The laughter rolls away, quieting like ripples after a pebble plunks into a pond. You let yourself sink into that fading hum, only to have it replaced by something deeper and immense rolling tone that makes the air itself thrum. The great monastery bell is ringing now, not the little hand clappers or the rooster's earnest squeals, but the towering bronze voice carried from the belfry above. For the monks, this is no ordinary sound. It is both clock and scripture, shaking the earth with every strike, as though it wants even the stones to remember their duties. Asterisk. Here's the tangible fact. By the later Middle Ages, monasteries often had large church bells that rang with remarkable power, summoning not only cloistered brethren, but entire villages into alignment with their schedule. These bells marked canonical hours, yes, but they also became the heartbeat of the community beyond the cloister walls. They told bakers when to bake, merchants when to open stalls, and farmers when midday had arrived. The bell tower became, in a way, the village wristwatch, before wrists ever held watches. Asterisk, but the quirk hiding inside the bronze is simple. These bells were heavy, often intimidatingly so, and ringing them was not a matter of casually tugging at a rope. It was labor. Imagine being the poor bell ringer, struggling half asleep, tugging with all his weight, bouncing up and down like an oversized squirrel on a string, just to ring sound from the hulk of metal. Some chronicles even whisper of monks being lifted slightly off their feet when the counterswing pulled to suddenly a free. An intended ride during matins, a comical image tucked into the rigor of monastic life. Asterisk. And historians still debate how much precision these massive bells achieved. Did they toll only at rough intervals, announcing about dawn or close to midday? Or did monasteries guard greater accuracy, perfecting their strikes with the seriousness of surgeons at work? Some evidence shows complex systems of ropes and weights developed to improve timing, but still precision may have collapsed if Brother Peter sneezed mid-pull. Asterisk. You imagine yourself climbing the narrow stairs to the bell tower, the spiral stone steps chilled with dew, your hand bracing against walls worn smooth by centuries of monks doing the same. At the top looms the bell, huge and green with age, ropes dangling into the stairwell. The wind gusts across your face as you step out, carrying with it the sense of damp fields. Sheep huddled in mornings too early for bleating. Asterisk. Brother Bellringer takes his post. He braces with both legs, grasps the rope, and heaves. The bronze sways, sighing once, then striking with a roar that makes the rafters jump. The sound is less a note than a presence, a vibration that lands in your stomach the way thunder does. It doesn't politely ask you to attend prayers, demands. Even if you were dead asleep in the dormitory 3 floors below, you'd feel the summons. Even if you were a farmer in the next valley, you'd pause mid-bucket just to acknowledge you'd been rung into order. Asterisk. At ground level, villagers glance up at the steeple, smiling in half-awake obedience. For them, the bell is both nuisance and comfort, as familiar as the rooster, but louder, infinitely louder. The bell has democratic power. It reaches all ears. Whether monks bowed in cloister or peasants bending in fields. Asterisk. One mischievous novice whispers near you, if you cannot hear the bell, you must be halfway to heaven already. The grin is wide, the humor light, but as the booming rings fade into silence, you can't help but agree. There is something profoundly otherworldly about it, as if bronze itself carries prayers skyward. Asterisk. The song resumes in the chapel below, voices shaking lightly still from the bell's vibration. The great tone has passed, but it's left behind an ache in the chest, a kind of sacred echo that insists, you belong to this rhythm too. Asterisk. And once again, you are lulled not by silence, but by the certainty of a sound so large it can't be ignored, yet gentle in its own way, folding you into its embrace, one resonant wave at a time. The bell's final toll seems to linger, even after its echo fades, as if the air itself refuses to let go of the vibration. Everyone trickles back into rhythm, shuffling inside the chapel or the cloister walks. And while the sound was majestic, the mood is more human, now some eyes heavy with fatigue, some shoulders sagging as though weighted by sand. You too feel the pull in your body. The contradiction is striking. Monks commit to this sacred timetable, but their muscles, bones, and eyelids are still made of the same stuff as yours. Asterisk. Here's the solid historical truth. Monastic schedules required sacrifice from the body, early risings for matins, midnight vigils, constant interruptions, and a night's rest, all designed to show discipline over flesh. Sleep was never a priority for monks. It was secondary, even suspicious. It was accepted in small portions, as long as it didn't interfere with prayer or work. A Benedictine monk in the 9th or 10th century might have counted himself lucky to string together 5 continuous hours of sleep, often much less. Asterisk. And now, the quirk. Some monks became experts at dozing inconspicuously during long chants or sermons, with their hands folded and heads bowed. A novice might snatch a minute's reprieve without being spotted. It wasn't admirable, but it was tolerated as long as snoring didn't rattle through the psalms. A monk slipping into microsleep was hardly scandalous, it was inevitable. Imagine an entire choir of men chanting solemnly, only for one to let out a perfectly timed yawn that made half the row falter with suppressed laughter. Asterisk. Historians still wonder whether monks truly managed to sustain these disrupted sleep cycles without serious strain. Did they adapt, wiring their bodies into new patterns like long-distance travelers do with jet lag? Or did many of them shuffle wearily through their lives, resigned to half-dreaming through prayers? Some accounts describe monks so drowsy that abbots scolded them for singing with their mouths, but not their hearts. But the debate continues. Were they superhuman in devotion, or simply splendidly stubborn? Asterisk. You watch them now, pale in dawn's wintry light. Voices low, steady but heavy, their chants moving like stones rolled uphill by sheer will. The elder monk beside you rubs his eyes with slow reverence, not ashamed to show fatigue. You think, this is commitment, not to ease, but to meaning. You can almost taste the grit it takes to marry prayer with exhaustion. Asterisk A. Novice 2 rows over fails to resist. He leans gently sideways, sliding into drowse. There's a pause, then a cough meant to disguise laughter from the brother next to him. Still, the chant continues. No one halts prayer to rebuke him. The expectation isn't perfection of stamina, it's faithfulness, all the same. You admire the paradox. Discipline not in flawless wakefulness, but in the willingness to get up again and again, no matter your exhaustion. Asterisk. Your body mirrors theirs. You shift on the cool stone bench, eyelids heavier, lulled by the drone and rhythm, and for a brief moment, you nearly nod, lulled into their ancient balance between sleep and spirit. Only the soft echo of the last bell keeps you tethered, holding you upright even as your mind bends inward, hazy with drowsy sympathy for centuries of weary monks. Asterisk. Suddenly, a rooster belts out again outside. His tone is utterly unbothered, sharp as a trumpet note breaking composure. Several monks smile faintly. One whispers, "The loudest brother sings from the yard." Your chuckle joins theirs. Humor and fatigue rub shoulders, both essential parts of life here. Asterisk. You begin to wonder, is it sleep deprivation or mystical discipline that blurs these monks' boundaries between dream and prayer? The margins are unclear. The record books insist it's devotion. Your own body suggests it may just be aching flesh. Both explanations seem right. Perhaps that's the harmony. The sacred lives in even your weary bones. Asterisk. The chants carry on, wrapping your ears like a cradle sung as much lullaby as liturgy. The monks' fatigue becomes your fatigue. Their discipline becomes your comfort. You lean back. Dawn is fully here now, but no one looks resentful. They simply keep going, onward to the next hour, as if weariness itself is a prayer folded into the day. Asterisk. You exhale, deeply, heavily. Yes, you are already part of it too. The air has shifted once again. By now the bells have long since shaken the walls. The rooster has strutted around like he owns the yard, and the monks, though weary, have preserved their cadence. But this cadence doesn't stop with cloister walls. As you step tentatively beyond the monastery gates, you'll realize that this rhythm, the pulse of bells and roosters, spills outward into the village itself, trickling like a stream downhill until it washes over bakers, merchants,